And next up, I would like to welcome Associate Professor Dr. Eric Richardson from Duke University. So Eric was actually supposed to come to Thailand and work with all of the innovators, but unfortunately this was during the COVID pandemic. However, we have the honor of him giving our keynote speech for today, and hopefully we'll get to meet you soon, Eric. อันดับต่อไปขอเรียนเชิญดร. Eric Richardson จาก Duke University สหรัฐอเมริกาท่านมีประสบการณ์ทำงานกับบริษัทเครื่องมือการแพทย์ชั้นนำของโลกมาอย่างโชคโชนได้รวมก่อตั้งโครงการเร่งพัฒนานวัตกรรมด้านการแพทย์กับมหาวิทยาลัยชั้นนำแล้วก็เป็นที่ปรึกษาหลักของโครงการนี้ค่ะท่านจะมาให้เกียรติกล่าวคำเปิดเกี่ยวกับ Keynote Speech นะคะเดี๋ยวเรียนเชิญทาง Dr. Eric เลยค่ะ Hi Eric
Good morning, friends and colleagues. It's an honor to be with you. I'm very excited to share some thoughts with you today, and it's been wonderful to see your program evolve and grow over the last year and culminate in the demo day this morning. And I'm excited to hear the pitches. I wish I could be there in person to share today with you. We'll have to do that sometime soon. But I've been asked to give some thoughts on medtech innovation and my experience over the last few years working in both industry and in academia. And I look forward to sharing them with you today and also learning from you as I participate in your conference. So to start out, I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Eric Richardson. I run the Design Health program at Duke, which I'll talk about briefly. And I have started a program here at Duke and also previous programs at the Texas Medical Center and Rice in the area of medtech innovation. I also worked at Medtronic for some time, and my passion is getting together people from different disciplines to bring medical devices, digital health, and other technologies to market. I kind of want to share with you some of my experiences with regards to doing this. And I'd like to begin, as every engineer does, with their assumptions. I want to kind of briefly describe my assumptions of a typical innovator in academia. Oftentimes, there are many problems that we want to solve, many interesting questions. We have solutions to many of these questions, yet our time is very limited. And today I want to talk about how to effectively use our time to work on the right solutions and right problems, and how I've seen certain incubators and academic institutions do that well, and some of my own experiences of challenges in the area that I'm glad to share. I spend most of my time answering calls and emails that start out something like this. Eric, I've got an idea. So my colleagues, either in engineering or in medicine or the sciences, come to me with very interesting ideas. And it's my job at Duke to triage these ideas into a number of different programs we have. We have access to incubators and accelerators. We also work with them to license or start a company. We have teams of business students, engineering students, and we also have the Design Health program, which I run. And all of these are potential places for these projects to go. What I try and spend most of my time with these individuals doing is dissecting out what their idea is. And really, when we take apart an idea, we view an idea as two things. One is the problem or the market that we're trying to address, and the other is the solution or the concept. And as we break those out even further, usually these problems come from design ethnography in a formal sense, or maybe market research that we've done or we've paid someone to do. But oftentimes they're just frustrations that we have or that we perceive. On the solution side, this may come from a formal product development process. It may come from a maybe less formal brainstorming session, but oftentimes it's a light bulb that just turns on. So whereas the ideal world is doing formal design ethnography and feeding that into a formal product development process, oftentimes it's just a frustration that then turns on a light bulb and that becomes an idea. the reality is there are mixed sources and mixed maturities of ideas, and they come to us and to us all in many different forms. And I think the first step in successful programs is to tease out the solution and the need and be able to assess what's appropriate to put time and effort into. I'd like to share with you our triage process at Duke. It by no means is perfect, but it's something that we've developed over the last few years with some colleagues who have run similar programs at different institutions. When we look at an idea, we look at first the maturity, and I'll describe more what I mean about maturity. Next, the novelty, and last, how we can execute on that idea. And I'll go into these a little more, each one. So my disclaimer is, and I love this quote, all models are wrong, but some are useful. I hope you'll find some of these insights useful as you all begin your own ventures and programs in medtech innovation. So with regards to maturity, we often ask the question, how well defined is the idea? And we think of this in really two axes. One is the solution or the product, how well defined is that solution or product or technology? And then we also think of how well defined is the market, or how mature is the market. So on the x-axis here, we have a solution that could be anywhere from a preliminary sketch all the way to a final product or technology that has data behind it. On the vertical axis, we think about a hypothetical need. Someone says, I think people will need this because I need it, all the way to a very well-validated need that has an established market, and say I have over 100 customers that prove that this truly is a need. Our target obviously is to get in the upper right-hand corner where we have a finalized product and a validated need. However, we usually start in the lower left. In academics, we often have a need that's, we have a hypothesis around, or maybe it's from a RFA or RFP, and we think about the need a little bit, but then we do a whole lot of research or technology development. We really focus on the solution. And in both engineering and sometime in academic medicine, we really try and get the technology down first. Once we get to that technology platform, then we hand it over to our tech transfer offices that then go and try and find or validate the market for the need. This is known as a tech push approach. The other approach widely used is to do validation on the need. So before any energy is expended on the actual tech development, is to do the need validation to make sure you understand the market. And then once you have described the need or the pain point, to do product design, to use technologies that might exist or develop new technologies, and then move to the right on this graph until you hit the target. This is known as a market pull or a needs-driven approach, as opposed to a tech push approach. Both have their merits, and both come from academia all the time. But to illustrate this with some examples, here's something a colleague came to me with. How can I apply novel 3D metal printing techniques that I've developed in my lab into the cardiac space? This is very much a technology that is interested in a market, and we do kind of a tech transfer play in that regard. Another technology, again, in the cardiac space, is a physician or a team of students, actually in this case, of student doctors and physicians, asking me, how can we relieve left atrial pressure in heart failure patients? This is a need that needs to get to a solution eventually, and we use product design methods to get there. So my recommendation, no matter where you're at in this area, and for those pitching today or those who have ideas, is really to focus on validation of the need prior to doing much more technology development. Now, both are important and both go hand in hand, but the reason why I recommend doing market validation first and then technology development is because it is typically much cheaper and it burns risk much more quickly. If you look at the reasons why many startups fail, it's often because there is no market need. Yes, we can design poor products or faulty technology, but usually, or in many cases, it's the need that trumps over product design. And As an engineer, obviously, I want to go straight to the solution, or I have a technology that I want to find a market for, and that is very common and very possible. I would just say, watch out for that market and make sure that you validated your market need. There are many market validation tools that you be aware of. Design ethnography is the formal term that we often use. It's also known as contextual inquiry, or at least one flavor of it. Needs finding, as popularized from the biodesign textbook and method from our colleagues at Stanford, which I believe is being taught there. The I-Core, or lean startup methodology, to get 100+ interviews. We also use agile methodologies to really get to our customer to validate needs as quickly as possible. This is commonly done in the software space, and we found success with it, applying these techniques to the medical device space as well. And I would say it's important to validate needs outside of your own institution. Too often in academics, we get caught up with our own academic medical centers, which may represent healthcare in certain parameters or certain respects, but oftentimes we have very talented physicians or nurses that can handle a lot of ambiguity and complexity. But when we take it out to the general healthcare system, we run into problems that we hadn't seen before. So I'm of the opinion that we need to verify both the market and technology before product development. At Duke, we've developed an approach to do this called insight-informed innovation. It's one of many different techniques where we really look at the opportunity and the market before we go into solution landscaping and understand what's out there. And then we really focus on our concept. Now, this is an iterative process, and we're not always doing it in a linear fashion, but we have a very kind of tedious method in which we try and validate the market before getting into the solution space. We do formal needs finding and ethnography, where we gather insights and literally spend thousands of hours every year in clinical settings trying to understand what the clinical problems are. We do a formal root cause analysis on these, and then they get clumped up into what we call needs. And then those needs get clustered into a need cluster. And then finally, we have themes that we go after. So we use these insights, these observations, to be able to determine the direction of where we should do our technology development. So like I said, we might have thousands of needs in every given year, and thousands of insights, hundreds of needs, tens of need clusters, and then we focus on a theme every year. This is kind of a high-level graph of then how we develop our product concept. We take those insights and needs, match them with technologies, or look for technologies that are being developed and support those technologies to get to a product concept. So with that said, if we get through the maturity, or have looked at both market validation and are somewhat confident in our technology, then we turn to novelty. And this, again, is where we weed out many ideas and many companies that come to us. On the novelty side, we, again, dissect out novelty in two directions. So we look for the novelty of the technology or the solution, and we also look for the novelty of the market. So on the market side, there can be a very well understood market, which isn't always bad. And then there can be new markets and newly articulated markets. On the solution side, there can be something that maybe there's some IP already in the space, or similar products exist, and there's no solid patent around the technology, all the way to something that's highly patentable, or maybe has a patent portfolio. And how we look at ideas here is in the lower left, we have the ERS, we call them. This is, I want something faster, smaller, cheaper. These are usually well understood markets, and they're areas where there's a lot of intellectual property. And we try and stay away from that area because big companies are usually better suited to go after those areas. The disruptive tech is very interesting. And in markets where we really understand what the problems are, and we can get a new technology platform, this can be a wonderful opportunity, especially in academia, where we're developing new technologies and deep tech to be able to solve these problems. I give the example here of transcatheter heart valves, which were a new technology, but an old problem to aortic stenosis. And IP ended up being very, very key in a lot of those companies that started in that space. In new markets, we think a lot about, so digital health is a classic example here. There are so many interesting new markets that are being created by technologies in digital health. Now, there may not be IP here. There may be other ways that we can protect our ideas. Sometimes there is, but oftentimes we're using platforms or algorithms or different machine learning approaches, which may or may not have proprietary or at least patents in the traditional way, but they open up whole new markets, which are really exciting. And this is an area that we're particularly interested in. Now, if you have a patented solution and a newly articulated market, those are the unicorns. Those are the rare finds, and those are exciting spaces. They don't come around very often. So our recommendation to teams in these spaces are really to stay away from that lower left-hand corner, with one exception I'll talk about in just a moment. In the upper right-hand corner, congratulations, please call me. I would love to invest. Those are hard to come by. In the lower right, again, intellectual property is key here. So we look carefully at IP. And if it's a well-understood market, we want to know what the incumbents are doing in that market. And we will proceed only after we do a careful IP assessment and make sure that we have good and defensible IP. In the upper left, we think about how we're going to maintain our competitive advantage without patents. Or do we have access to a particular patient population, or have we built a network that we can leverage, or do we have access to data or resources that others might not have? So we think about competitive advantage and who we want to serve in the upper left. So the one caveat I'll make to staying away from that lower left-hand corner is the cheaper, which we often come across. I've done a lot of work in emerging markets and developed a program at Rice on looking at emerging markets. And I think that developing cheaper products at lower price points can be a powerful tool to be able to penetrate markets. However, a couple of cautions that I'll provide. So two big pitfalls that I often see is that we get together a team of smart engineers and physicians who say that they need a cheaper device, an oximeter or something like that. And they go and they cobble together something, and then they say, well, we can sell this potentially at this price point. My observation is that if there's no fundamentally new technology in that device, if there's not a fundamental change in how that device works, typically our industry colleagues are better suited to make those plays. They know much better about manufacturing and sourcing and design for manufacturing, unless those happen to be your areas in academia. Usually industry is well ahead of us, and we often don't see a lot of the hidden costs. So we do a quick calculation and say, I can do this for $5. Why do I have to buy it for 10? Well, we don't see all those costs that industry is very well aware of. The other thing that I'll put out there is sometimes we assume that just a lower price point will help us get into a market. And that's not always the case. I've been a part of several projects where we could build something that's relatively cheap. And we've actually found things that are relatively cheap that are already on the market, but they're not being used. And this could be a supply chain issue or a training issue, or a number of things, markups from distributors, for example. So I would really, really think hard about what it is that you're bringing. Is it new technology? And is cheaper really what's needed? If you can say that, then it's a great play. So the last thing I'll talk about is execution, and this is a challenge, especially if you're in academia and a busy academic trying to keep up with teaching, research, and all the many things that we're doing. The dream that I often hear and I talk to my colleagues about is, I'll work on this part-time, maybe spin out a company. It will take a couple of years, and then some big company will come in and buy me for hundreds of millions of dollars, or they'll run with it and I'll be set. They'll license the IP. So this formula rarely works. We often point to a couple of examples of this, but the reality of this by and large is that several people need to work full time to get a product to market. And on average, usually in med tech, we're talking about something that's 5 years plus to get to market. And then, yes, you may have a large buyout of 150 million or a licensing deal. When it leaves your hands. Average average founder equity, may be around 10%. It depends on the industry. It depends on what you're selling. And remember that the estimated success rate of medtech startups, as I talk to my colleagues, and there are many studies on this, but if you just look at all the ideas that go into the front end, oftentimes it's only 2 to 4% that make it all the way to the end. So just keeping that in mind helps us think about what we should really do and who are the right people to move forward in this sense. Again, a 2x2 matrix here of how I like to think about it. So obviously, if you can spend your free time, just a little bit of time on this, you think it's going to be a little bit of time and it's just you, this can end up sucking a lot of energy and time out of your life and your productivity as an academic. If you're willing to take that jump and go full time, and it is just you, often that's a risky move. You're going to be betting all of it on this idea, and I don't always advise that. If you have some time to call in some favors to several friends or a network of people with the right talent in order to vet your need and to bring down the risk using things like market validation, this can be very promising. And several people with the right talent working full time, that's called a company. And obviously that's where we want to get with many of our products. So again, my recommendation here is not to jump in full time or not to overburden just yourself doing everything. It's to get as much free part-time help as you can from talented people who know the business side of things. As academics, we often think of that we are familiar with how to develop technology and spin out companies, but I don't consider myself an expert in that, and I've done it several times. So I think that it's getting the right people who know regulatory, clinical strategy, reimbursement, intellectual property strategy, and to be able to make sure you know what you're doing before you build that out into a full-time team and to a company. So in summary, we have lots of problems, some solutions, and some time. By validating several of those problems, we can narrow it down to just the interesting problems we want to work on. And by doing a novelty assessment, we can narrow down the solutions that truly have novel markets and IP. And then lastly, we can build out a team that can help us amplify our time and our effort. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing more about your projects and your pitches, and hopefully someday be able to visit you in Thailand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, for that extremely insightful talk. We hope you come and visit Thailand soon, and we look forward to welcoming you in Duke University. ขอกราบขอบพระคุณดร. Eric Richardson นะคะในการกล่าว Keynote Speech ให้กับทางท่านผู้ชมแล้วก็นวัตกรทุกท่านนะคะหวังว่าทางทีม Startup ทั้งหลายที่เข้าโครงการเราจะสามารถเห็นนะคะช่องทางของการดำเนินการงานวิจัยไปจนถึง Startup นะคะมีหลายแง่มุมให้คิดถึงเลยนะคะโดยเฉพาะการบ่มเพาะแล้วก็การปั้น Startup เนี่ยค่ะสำคัญมากเลยตรงช่วงต้นนะคะ